Hi, and welcome to this month's episode of Healthy Living Resources. This month we're going to be discussing work-family justice, so stay tuned. Welcome back to this month's episode of Healthy Living Resources. I'm Amanda Woods, Healthy Finances Program Specialist with OSU Extension, Family and Consumer Sciences. And this month we're going to be talking about the concept of work-family justice. And joining us to do that is Jenny Lobb, our Franklin County Extension Educator, who has joined us in the past. But this month Jenny's joining us to discuss work-family justice, which basically is just creating an environment where policy, employer, everything kind of supports the idea that parents are able to thrive and be successful in their family life as well as their work life. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you.
So before we jump into what is work-family justice, like really getting into it, tell our viewers a little bit about why this is a topic you're so passionate about right now.
Well, I first found out about this topic and got interested in it just earlier this year after the birth of my own son in February. And so as I'm living this experience myself, I've been learning a lot through personal experience and also doing some research on my own because I am realizing just how important it really is.
Yeah. So now that it's directly affecting you, you're becoming much more apparent that this isn't really something that we're able to enjoy. A lot of parents are able to enjoy. So tell our viewers what is work-family justice?
So essentially, work-family justice is just this concept that everyone, regardless of your employer, your gender and parenting role, your social economic status, that everyone has opportunity to participate fully in both work life and family life.
So obviously a pretty important thing. A lot of people, a lot of working people, when they're deciding whether or not to have families, there's probably a lot of apprehension about whether they're going to be able to do both, whether that's the idea that they're going to be able to thrive and work in family life, right? So what are some of the benefits that we feel when we're able to have that balance, that support?
Well, my background is in public health, and certainly I'm learning that from a public health standpoint, having workplace supports such as paid parental leave, child care, definitely have big public health payoffs.
Right.
So when we think about having paid leave where parents are actually able to take time away from work after a milestone event like the birth of a child, they're more likely to take their child to well visits, which is a preventive measure. They're more likely to go to their own follow-up visits, which for the birth mother is especially important, and take care of their own health, especially if they're managing any sort of chronic condition at the same time. And then we think about breastfeeding, which there's this huge body of research showing how beneficial that is for both mother and child following a birth. And the reality is that if you don't have paid leave and you economically need to return to work, you're much less likely to invest the time and energy into trying to make that happen and be successful in that.
Right. So having paid paternal leave is really best for the parents as well as the kids. Everybody's able to, obviously the children are getting the hands-on experience and all of that nurturing that they need from the early age, but the parents are given the flexibility and the time to really immerse themselves in that experience as well.
Right, yeah, being present with your child child, there's some studies that are specific to babies who are born prematurely that are in the NICU. And the sad reality in those situations is that parents will try to bank or reserve any paid time off that they have. And so while baby's in the NICU, they will go back to work and try to reserve time for when they can be at home with their child. But the literature shows that when parents spend time in the NICU with their child, the hospital stay is shortened, pain is lessened, there's actual measures of pain response, and the child recovers and can go home more quickly just by having that reaction or that interaction with their parents. So so regardless of whether a baby's born prematurely or not, being present in those early days is really important.
And that's really tough, right? Because I'm sure if it were up to the parents' choice, mom or dad would obviously prefer to be there with their new baby in the NICU or not. But there's that pressure for us to get back because we don't have enough time. That time won't be paid because we don't have the support of paid parental leave. We'll get into the stress associated with costs a little bit later, but so paid parental leave, is there anything, we've discussed earlier policy, like you and I ahead of time, is there anything that's in place right now on a federal level that helps in any way to support parents with a work-family justice?
Very little.
Yeah.
So the United States is one of the only, if not the only, developed nation in the world without paid parental leave. We have in this nation the Family Medical Leave Act, which guarantees if you're eligible, 12 weeks of unpaid leave and basically job security upon your return. But you have to meet certain requirements even to be eligible for that unpaid leave.
So can you talk to us a little bit about that eligibility?
Yeah, you need to have worked full-time for your employer for the previous year. And your employer needs to be big enough. I can't remember off the top of my head how many employees they have to have, but they essentially need to have a certain number of employees to even qualify as a company or an institution that offers this policy. So
what I'm hearing there is that part-time employers of smaller businesses, people who work for themselves, entrepreneurs, wouldn't have access to this support anyways.
Correct, yes.
Okay. But that's it. Doesn't sound like there's much else kind of in the works at this moment, like real tangible policy that would in any way support.
Right. It's more on an employer by employer basis. So at The Ohio State University, I was fortunate to have 6 weeks of paid leave, and then I was able to take to utilize that Family Medical Leave Act and take an additional 6 weeks off out of my own vacation time. But that's because our employer offered that. So some employers would choose to offer something similar, others would not.
So that also could be, just as an aside, a recommendation for people who are maybe looking for new employment or considering employment and also considering starting a family or are struggling with that balance now. A benefit, a fringe benefit to consider when looking for new employment, whether this is a level of support that would be offered from a prospective employee or whether it would be worth making a change to take advantage of another company's offering.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I see that you have a book here. Talk to us a little bit about this.
So this book, it's called Making Motherhood Work, and it was written by a sociologist. Her name is Caitlin Collins, who interviewed women from 4 different countries, including the United States, on how they have experienced that transition back to work after becoming a mother. And this is the book where I first learned about this concept of work-family justice, where it was first introduced to me. And I use Caitlin Caitlin Collins' definition as kind of a working definition, as we shared at the beginning, that she interviewed women from 4 different countries: the United States, France, I believe Germany, Sweden. The others were primarily European, and essentially found that in the United States, women are just floundering. You know, we do the best we can, but live with this guilt that we're not doing enough at both the workplace and at home. So it's kind of a double-edged sword of guilt, and just not healthy and not pleasant for anyone.
So that's interesting. So you mentioned earlier that a lot of other countries do offer a much higher level of support for new parents, and so their findings, their responses were not nearly in the same vein as American parents, or like, did they have different stressors, or ours were just exacerbated because of there was zero support?
So, I think parenting across the board comes with some level of stress.
No one's going to be a stress-free new parent.
Right,
Okay.
but some of the ones that really hit home hard, like the economic stress of, having to return to work because you need the money, trying to afford childcare, which we'll talk more about, are non-existent in countries where paid parental leave and/or universal child care are in place.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in contrast to other countries, not only are American parents struggling with just the idea and experience of being new parents, this whole set of new stressors that you probably weren't expecting, might have been expecting, but I hear it's a lot. But we're also trying to grasp with the fear of financial security as well. How are we going to maintain our household? How are we going to pay our bills? All of these things. And so it's just that time is a lot more stressful than really it should be for any new parent.
Yeah.
So when we were discussing this earlier, you mentioned the concept of the 5th trimester, which is interesting. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was a brand new term for me too, and I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about the 4th before we get to the 5th.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so obviously there's only three.
The 3 trimesters of pregnancy are well known, and then this 4th trimester has been used for a while to describe that those initial 12 weeks after the birth of a child, where mother and child are kind of adjusting to life outside the womb with one another. The mom is recovering physically, lots of mental, emotional changes going on. And so that is a really critical time thinking about paid parental leave, to allow that mom's space to transition.
Let this be the main focus. And
Right. But we know that many women, especially in the United States, go back to work without having that margin to recover. And so some are going back during that 4th trimester period, but assuming that you've had that 12 weeks to adjust, that's where this new term, this so-called 5th trimester, comes into play, where that's the adjustment of going back to work and trying to figure out how to manage or balance your work responsibilities with family responsibilities.
And just everyone's expectations. We chatted a little bit earlier. I shared my sister's experience of going back to work and just feeling really pressured to not only achieve in the workplace, but almost overachieve to kind of prove that you can handle it all. Can you talk a little bit about just those expectations that are there for new moms and dads when they kind of return?
Yeah, I think that's a common experience. A lot of women feel pressured to overcompensate once they get back to the workplace, just to prove to their employer or their supervisor that they can still do their job. And there's also this term that psychologists use to describe parenting in this day and age called intensive parenting, where parents try to do it all, whether it's because they are trying to measure up to what they perceive to be cultural expectations, what they see others doing on social media, or whether or not those expectations actually exist. exist, there is this cultural pressure to do it all as a parent, volunteering in your child's classroom, at school, making meals, enrolling your child in extracurricular activities, so on and so forth, different, like whether they're playing sports or learning to play an instrument or learning a new language. There's all this stuff that comes at you as a new parent that says you should do this, you need to do this, so on and so forth. So that's kind of a whirlwind in and of itself that parents are trying to keep up with. And then at the same time, if you are a working parent, there's the expectations, and they again could be perceived. They might be expectations you're placing on yourself that you need to prove that you still can do the job that you were doing prior to the birth of your child. Or I would say in more cases than the home responsibilities, these could be real expectations from your employer that you need to go above and beyond in your position just to keep your job or be promoted to the next position.
Right.
So
it's that, I'm sure you've heard this, I feel like we've all heard this phrase, like, can women really have it all? Like, can we have our family? Can we have our job? And like, obviously we're capable of doing that, but those expectations can be a little bit crushing when you don't have the support that you need to actually accomplish all of those things, right? And also, you talked about social media, which is interesting because you joined us a couple months ago for our digital detoxing episode, and we talked about the impact that just constantly scrolling through social media can have on our mental health. So in this time, in that 4th and 5th trimester for parents, scrolling through and seeing other people who presumably are doing it all so well because the picture shows everything going really well, that can have a really negative effect, I'm sure, in that time when everything's already just a little bit out of whack.
Yeah, you might see only the highlights of what others are doing and think
you're not seeing the temper tantrums,
right, and think I'm not doing enough, or I forgot to have my child do this art project, or I'm not making my own baby food, or whatever it may be, whatever you're seeing on social media. And I think it's totally okay and even beneficial to step back from that and just have more realistic expectations of yourself during this time. So what I'm hearing is there are a variety of stressors for new parents, but one of the biggest one that comes to mind when I think about starting a family or just think about other people having started a family is the cost, right? So the cost associated with having a child, with raising a child, with childcare in general. Talk a little bit about just the cost of childcare and maybe the impact that also has on people's ability to achieve this like work-family balance. Sure, yeah. So it's staggering to say the cost of childcare is more per year is more than the cost of in-state tuition in just about every state. So you're paying to enroll an infant in childcare, you're paying more per year than you would pay to enroll a college-age child in higher education. Yes. So yeah, that really puts it in perspective. And a lot of times, or I should say, there have been surveys that show that the average American family is putting 1/3 of their income towards childcare.
Which is
insane.
That's an insane amount of money.
Especially when, financial experts would recommend putting 1/3 of your income towards housing. Well, you have 1/3 going towards housing, 1/3 going towards childcare. That doesn't leave a whole lot left for other needs, let alone wants. And so, and that's just the average. So if you're of lower income, lower socioeconomic status, you might be putting as much as 2/3 of your income towards childcare. And you find yourself in this space where you can't afford not to work, but you also can't afford to work because you're putting so much of your income towards childcare, and it's stress. It's stressful. I don't know how else or what else to say.
Yeah. So I've heard stories, obviously, when families are able. My sister-in-law and my brother actually started a family, and it was more cost-effective for her to stay home than it would be, like, she was essentially working just to pay childcare, which I hear is really common. But what do the families do that can't make that decision? Maybe sole breadwinners. What are there any resources? Like, how do they manage to make it work, or is that the struggle? They're not able to. That's kind of why we're here today, right? So that's so tough. So what are some of the other impacts of maybe cost on this? Like, do a lot of families maybe end up having to, like, cut corners elsewhere? Does, like, this just kind of impact the overall family financial security when all of this money that was presumably being spent elsewhere to kind of keep your lives running is now being funneled towards childcare?
Yeah, I would say yes. You know, any of those scenarios could play out where maybe you're now finding yourself in a food insecure situation where you're skipping meals, or finding that you can't afford to buy groceries anymore or as often as you would like. Maybe cutting other corners, like if there are medications.
Right, I was going to say, God forbid your child needs medications, or you take medications. That's so tough. So, in a perfect world, in a perfect United States, there would be policies in place that would allow these parents to not only paid paternity leave, but there could possibly be a universal child care, which you mentioned earlier. Other countries have it. I'm assuming they're able to send their children to safe child care, and it won't break the bank.
Right.
So what would that would obviously be a huge help, but we're not there. But are there any other supports or resources like that for child care, or is it really just that much of a burden on new parents?
That would be, it is a huge burden, and that would be the, in my opinion at least, the best solution would be, I would encourage new parents to, educate yourself on these issues and advocate, encourage policymakers that we as a nation need these supports, that families need these supports.
It's so tough because I feel like a lot of times in the work that we do, and when we're just even with the telecast, we present an issue and then we talk about how we can fix it, how we can actively work to improve the situation. But they're really, these are policy changes that need to happen on a federal level that will then allow us to take advantage of and then really work to maybe improve these situations as well. So she's absolutely right. Get involved, advocate, so that all parents are able to enjoy that time and have less stress and really just have the healthiest family structure that they can. So outside of obviously cost, what are some of the other negative impacts that this lack of family work justice has on our families, on our children, and our relationships with each other?
I think there is a lot of stress outside of the cost that impacts family life, and just the exhaustion that comes with trying to keep up and trying to do everything that needs to be done, and at the same time the mental and emotional changes that are happening as you adjust to life with a new child. That's stressful in and of itself. So lots of pressures, both internally and externally, that are going on. And so, we talk about policy change being what would be most helpful, what is most needed, and I agree with that. And at the same time, I think that in the immediate, what an action step that our viewers today could take would be to just recognize all of that pressure and try to give yourself a little grace, be kind to yourself, and try to set more realistic expectations to the degree that's possible, whether that means having a conversation with employers and having having some sort of agreement in place with your supervisor where they understand where you're at in life right now, and also just recognizing what your limitations are personally rather than trying to do it all. Just, taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and really being more realistic as to what your priorities might be during this time.
That's a great suggestion. Just understanding that you're doing the best that you can, with the situation that you're in, and stepping back. Maybe don't open Instagram today, and just give yourself a little bit of a forgiveness and a break, because we're all just doing the best that we can. So what are some other things? So we talked about finances a lot, which is obviously an area that I am most interested in. So for those families that are kind of feeling this burden, there are some steps that we could take too, right? So if this is your situation and you're unable to change it, maybe seeking some financial counseling, maybe working with somebody to kind of ease that financial burden as well. Would that be maybe a recommendation that we could make? Like seeking out these other, so we can't obviously solve the problem at its source, but we can like work to maybe help support parents in all of these other areas. So focusing on health, focusing on mental health for sure when it comes to all of this stuff, right? So like taking advantage of maybe some of those resources.
Yeah, the OSU Extension has a mindfulness program, which I think certainly anyone could benefit from, anyone who deals with stress, which is literally everyone.
Every single person.
But especially new parents, just having some of those tools in your toolbox so that you know how to take a step back and breathe when you need to breathe. So, we're always breathing, but how often do we think about it and do it intentionally, just to detach from the situation and check in with yourself when you need to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Taking time and really just understanding that all of these other things are important, and while this one area is really stressful, we can do what we can to take care of ourselves and our families in those outside areas. Any last bits of information before we leave for the month? Anything else you want to share? Any recommendations, tips? That's it. Just take care of your mental health, parents.
Yes. I don't even know where to start. I'm going through it with all of the new parents who may be watching right now, and so just day by day, not trying to get too far ahead of the moment and stress out about things that don't need to be stressed out about right here and right now.
Also, sage advice for just, everybody. Don't get ahead. Don't get ahead of it. I think that a lot of times we worry about things that aren't even happening yet. So there we go. Seek out some mindfulness education, and maybe that'll help us all take better control of the situation that we're currently in. Thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us this month. I think this is a really great topic, and maybe we'll have you back in the future to discuss whatever changes have happened, or maybe where you're at like a year from now and how you've managed all of this stuff. So thanks for letting us in, and we will see you all next month.